Shalom, shalom. Peace be with you. Peace be upon you. Blessings to all watching from Maya Alaha, the Most High God. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and this, our latest video created and uploaded, in no way or form is an intended or intentional copyright infringement, etc. It's only for educational purposes, because when we first created our YouTube channel, the Ministry of the Real Truth, we decided upon a policy. Honesty is our best policy, and we strive to live by that on a daily basis, to honour that on a daily basis. We also believe in old-time chivalry, where a man's word is his honour, so he should be honourable, and so forth. And we state, most of our videos, introduction to our videos, that we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we want to present all the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but that truth, in regard to the original ancient biblical manuscripts, the texts, the scriptures, and what they really say through the original ancient, very old Tav Asherit, the Lishana Articus the prayer, which is the sacred scribal language of God that He spoke to Adam and Eve in the garden, etc., and the Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, the New Testament, in the language Galilean Aramaic, that Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, and His disciples spoke and wrote in. We have had people come at us and say, "Oh, nah, you're lying, you're this, you're that," and other retorts saying, "Yeah, the Ministry of Real Truth put up all this sort of stuff, right?" But what we have presented to people throughout our videos is fact. It's established fact. So, for those out there who doubt us and say we're this and we're that, and try to disprove us, etc., that we are actually what we state we are, that what we are abiding by is honesty, bringing you the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth in regards to those original ancient, very old Testament and New Testament manuscripts from the original Apostolic Church of the East, founded by Addai and Thomas, disciples of the Christ, along with the help of Bartholomew and Peter, supposedly. So here is a interview and the words from a Patriarchate, or head of a Apostolic Church, or branch of the Apostolic Church of the East in California, to verify that what we have said throughout our videos is fact. It's true. We're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. So let's have a look at this.
Well, I'd like to welcome His Grace Mar Abba Royel, Bishop of California, Assyrian Church of the East, and Mr. Stephen Missick, who's the author of the Acts of Apostle Thaddeus. Welcome to our program.
Thank you, Armina.
It's good to be here again.
Thanks for coming back again. I would like to ask you a few questions. Would you tell us who was Mar Addai and what is his significance to Assyrian Christian history?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to greet all of the viewers of A and B. It's a pleasure for me to be here. The importance of one of the 72 apostles of Christ, who is Saint Thaddeus, or in our own language, in the Syrian tongue, we refer to him as Mar Addai Shlicha. Saint Addai the Apostle is He is one of the founding apostles sent by St. Thomas, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, 3 years after the resurrection. So around the year 36 or so, he was sent by St. Thomas to the city of Edessa, or Urhai, which was called by the Greeks Osrowene. And that was the remnant of what was once the great Assyrian Empire. Of course, it fell in the Roman part of the world at the time, but it was a buffer state, a small city-state, a small kingdom that acted as a buffer between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And so that's where the origins of the missionary activity of Saint Thaddeus or Mar Addai took place after leaving Jerusalem.
And what is the anaphora of Mar Addai and Marmari?
Well, the missionary activity of the apostles, especially Mar Addai or Saint Thaddeus, was not only in the spreading of the gospel, from going from Jerusalem to Edessa to Urhai, but he also brought with him the prayers of the church in Jerusalem, the prayers of the early apostles of Christ. And one of those prayers is what you have referred to, the anaphora of Saint Addai and Saint Mari. And the word anaphora, of course, means Eucharistic prayer. In our own Assyrian tongue or in the Aramaic language, it would be Qudasha. And that is the prayer by which in the church the bread and wine are changed into the body and blood of Christ. But the anaphora of Mar Addai and Marmari, Saint Thaddeus and Saint Mari coming in from Jerusalem, is today the oldest Eucharistic prayer, the oldest anaphora, which is in use in Christendom by any Christian church. And that is a fact that's attested to by scholars and by church fathers and whatnot. So that is really the gem of the Assyrian Church of the East, because it comes from Christ, from his apostles, from the Holy Land to Edessa. And of course it spread to other parts of the East from there.
Now, who was King Abgar?
Well, in speaking about St. Thaddeus, you really can't give a complete picture without mentioning King Abgar, who we refer to as Malka Augar Ukama, King Abgar the Black, or King Abgar Ukama, who during the early part of the first century of the Christian era, he was the king of the city-state of Edessa, the kingdom of Edessa, during the time of Christ when he was preaching in Jerusalem. And King Abgar had heard, according to the tradition and according to the Acts of Thaddeus, which I'm sure Stephen will speak about more as a literary genre, as a book, he had heard of the miracles which Christ performed in Jerusalem, and he himself had an illness. They think it was a gout, and at the time that was known as the illness of kings. So he sent an emissary to a mission to go to Jerusalem to meet Christ, and he sent with them a letter that he had written inviting Christ to heal his illness. And the letter, of course, is recorded in the ecclesiastical history of Eusebius of Caesarea in the early 4th century, and by other testimonies who have actually seen the letters. And he invited Christ to come to heal him, to come to Edessa, and he mentions that he had heard that the preaching and the gospel of Christ was not being received and that he was not being believed on by the inhabitants of the Holy Land. So he invited Christ to come over and to receive up to half of his kingdom in Edessa. And he sent that letter with his emissaries to Jerusalem, and the emissaries reached Christ while the Lord was still preaching, and according to some historical evidences, we think it was the 3rd year of Christ's during his public ministry, so the last year before Christ was crucified. And of course Jesus receives the mission that has come from King Abgar, and he responds to the letter of the king. One of the emissaries of King Abgar takes down the words of Jesus, where he gives a blessing to Abgar and to his kingdom, and he says that he must fulfill the mission which the Father has given him, but after he has ascended into heaven, he would send one of his disciples to come and heal King Abgar. And that's what happened when St. Thaddeus was sent by St. Thomas around the year 36, or 3 years after the resurrection.
That's interesting. And now, what is the significance of the city of Edessa to the history of Assyrian Church of the East? I think we covered that.
Right, surely. Well, Edessa, which is of course the Greek form, in our own language it would be Urhai, and the word or it's a bipartite or a dual name. The prefix Ur is an ancient Akkadian word which means city, and we see that in the Bible in many ancient place names in the Old Testament. And the second part, Hai, where we say Urhai, means the living one. So when translate or put together would be the city of the living one, referring to Christ, because Christ had blessed the city through the letter that he sent to King Abgar, and also the image of Christ, which I forgot to mention this, that the mission that had come from King Abgar, one of the emissaries had painted the face of Christ, which Jesus blessed, and they took that back, and that was a relic that was cherished in the city of Edessa for many, many centuries. So that's why it was known as the city of the living one, because they had the letter from Jesus and the holy image of the face of Christ, which was kept in the royal compartments in the city of Edessa. So that is the beginning of the apostolic evangelization, the apostolic mission of what we know as the Assyrian Church of the East. And the apostles, of course, spread from Edessa after the death of Thaddeus. His own disciple Marmari reached the city of Seleucia Ctesiphon, which was the capital of the Persian Empire, around the year 80 AD. And he began to establish churches, and he established a see there of the Patriarchate of the Assyrian Church of the East. And that mission also spread further north into Arbil, which was known as Addai at the time. And there was another mission there. So from Edessa, the church spread further east into the depths of the Persian Empire.
Now, where would be Edessa now, as far as geography?
Edessa nowadays is in southeast Turkey, and it is known as Urfa. It's referred to as Urfa.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Stephen, would you please tell us about yourself and what motivated you to make this book?
Okay, well, first, several years ago, back in '91, I was doing some research. I like to study the Bible and church history, and I read some things about the Aramaic language, and it talked about, at the end of this briefing about the Aramaic language, it's talking about the Assyrian people and how Aramaic is still spoken to this day, and it's talking about the Syriac language. So through this, I found the story of the Assyrian Church of the East, found it very fascinating, so I started doing a lot of research in it. Especially, one thing that really amazed me was how the church spread to China, to India, Mongolia. So I wrote some papers that are published in the Journal of Assyrian Academic Studies talking about these communities established by the Church of the East, which is really fascinating. During the Middle Ages, they had churches in China. The Church of the East did in China, and in India, Mongolia, largest Christian community in the world. And of course, through disasters, the church declined. So I thought that was very fascinating, and it's overlooked. Usually when church history is taught, it's taught from a Eurocentric, there's reasons for that, but I think it's unfortunate that the contributions of the Assyrian Church are usually left out. So I started doing a lot of research, and I actually went, in 2001, I was in Syria. I went to Aramaic-speaking villages around Damascus, the village of Malula, and I went to Hasaki, and I visited several Assyrian communities over there. And of course, while I was there in Damascus, 9/11 occurred. I'm still in the military. So about a year later, I got deployed to Iraq, and I served in Iraq as a soldier, as a sergeant. And later on, I felt the Lord moved me to become a chaplain. So I went to Iraq again. The first time I was in Iraq was 2003 and 4. I went back 2009 and 10 as a chaplain to minister to the spiritual needs of our troops. And during both deployments, I worked with Assyrian Americans who were employed by the government as translators. So it's good to, while I was there to work with.
Full circle.
Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, the odd thing was I ran into the same people I met before 2003 and 4. It's like, yeah.
How did you meet Morel?
I think I wrote a book about Addai actually, and I think he came across my book. I found him on. I got a lot of Assyrian friends, and somehow on Facebook I found Addai. And
social media, it's easy to find one another now.
And he likes to put artwork, the Assyrian artwork, icons, and I liked his artwork, and sometimes I'd share it, and finally we got into communication. I guess you heard about the movie project I was working on. That's what we need to talk about next. So how did I get involved in the movie project? What happened was last May, somebody contacted me. One of the papers I wrote 3 papers on the Church of the East. One was Martoma, about the Assyrian Church of the East in India, and the story about it's Apostolic, founded by Thomas. So somebody found this article and said, well, this would make a great movie. And I thought, you know, it really would. Because this past year they made a lot of faith-based movies and biblical movies, and they're making a lot of movies about India, like Life of Pi and other films. I said, well, this fits 3 genres that Hollywood's making right now. So I wrote the script up, but it didn't really work out with this producer. But through a friend, he had a friend of a friend makes movies in lower budget films, mostly westerns, and when I was doing the Thomas project, I included the whole story of Thaddeus in there, and I was thinking when we promote the Thomas project, we'd just have a short film on Thaddeus, and then it's like, well, to make a movie about Thaddeus, we don't have to film in India. We could just film it, here in this set, which we'll talk about later. So it's like, we can do the story of Thaddeus in a lower budget, and I think it's important to tell the story now because we can create awareness who the Assyrian people are. The Assyrian community needs to know their own story about Edessa and Mar Addai and King Abgar, but we can also reach out to the non-Assyrian world, as it were. And I think it's particularly important because the Assyrian culture is under serious threat right now, and perhaps by creating awareness, we can make people find out who the Assyrians are, and perhaps we can motivate people to actually help the Assyrians in their hour of need when we see this threat by ISIS and the unspeakable wars.
Yes. Now, when you wrote the script, Mar Abba also reviewed it, edited. I believe it was collaborated.
Took a look at it, actually. Your script was based on your book, though.
It's based on this. It's based on the doctrine of Addai, mostly. So yeah, I wrote the script, and I let him all the suggestions that he has. Yes, Mar, I'll do it, whatever you say, because I want to tell the story because I think it's important. But I want this to be an ecumenical film, the different Christian faiths, because we're all united in the apostles, for one thing. But I want to honor and show great respect to the story, and do it in all reverence to the traditions of the Assyrian Church of the East. So that's one of my motivations. So the sources of the script is the Bible, of course, because I tell the story how he became a disciple of Jesus Christ. But also it's called the doctrine of Addai, which was very ancient writing.
If I can just say it in our language, it's the Malpanut et Mar Addai Shlicha, which is a 4th century, 5th century document that, in terms of the Church of the East, is very important for that early history of the apostles.
Like Mar always said, there's a church historian writing around the year 325, almost immediately after Constantine stopped persecutions. He writes in his book, he knew Aramaic, he knew the Syriac language, so he went to Edessa, he went through the archives, and I guess he was skeptical, but he looked on the letter from Abgar with his own eyes, and he translated it himself. And he puts this in, it's called the Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius. It's the first complete book of church history, and it's got the story of the Assyrians right in there. So I took it from that. But later on, the Assyrians said, okay, what Eusebius did was nice, but let's tell the story our own way. So in the Syriac Aramaic language, they wrote the doctrine of Addai. But there are other sources. There's a Spanish woman, she may have been a nun, she may have just been like an adventuress, named Agraria. Agraria. She... about, 75 years or so after Eusebius, she went there and she also saw a statue of King Abgar. This is the king, this is King Abgar. She saw the letter itself, and they told her about not that Thaddeus was there, which he was. They mentioned Thaddeus was there, but they said also Thomas went. And of course that's in the script, that Thomas on his way to India went through Edessa as well. So these are based on the ancient accounts.
Ageria writes in her book, it's called The Pilgrimage, and she, referring to what Stephen was saying, she actually saw the image of Christ, which was brought back from Jerusalem, and the letters, the exchange of letters, and she narrates how the Bishop of Edessa had taken her around, and they actually used to have relics and souvenirs for pilgrims who would go to Edessa, which were copies of the letters between Jesus and Abgar that were copied and they were given to pilgrims and whatnot. So
I think they brought out the original edition.
So did you get one?
they stopped making them a long time ago.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it fell into Muslim hands,
Yeah, they probably destroyed everything.
they did indeed, unfortunately. So we have the records from Eusebius, and of course, in the Aramaic form is just translated or just transferred verbatim into the doctrine of Addai, but the original manuscripts, unfortunately, were lost through the persecutions.
Well, what I really enjoy is the collaboration between Americans and Assyrians making this movie together. And I think it will give some publicity to Assyrians among the Americans, and also it teaches. I personally didn't know much about the apostle, and now I have learned so much. It's totally educational for us as well. Kind of having an appreciation for our own culture and our religion even more.
If you read Stephen's book, you'll learn a lot more.
I should read it.
That narrates the whole history. But it's very important, Romina, you're very right. It's very important for our younger generations to know and to appreciate and to hold on to our history, the history of our church. The subtitle of the movie, and I'm sure we'll get into it, is the beginnings or the birth of Christianity among the Assyrians, of Assyrian Christianity. So these are things that are easily forgotten by the younger generations because we're so much into technology and social media and our smartphones and everything, and so the younger ones are forgetting where they've come from, where their parents and grandparents and where their tradition has come from.
And appreciate it.
So we have a movie out there they can download it and watch it on their iPhone.